Good evening, everyone. Jeff, oh, it's so good. You are a sight for sore eyes. I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks.
It has been a minute. Yeah, and same to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now here's the deal. I have been traveling. I've been thousands and thousands of miles in the last 7 or 8 days. I am The Walking Dead, which would be a good name for a show. And I also am certain that I appear as the true Yankee swamp hag that I am.
Well, let me contradict you, which I rarely do. I can't speak for your state of fatigue, but you look beautiful as ever. So,
You're so sweet. I didn't even wear jewels or nothing, no rings. Now, I usually clean up pretty well for you guys. Not tonight. I came home. I got home about 6:30 from the airport, and I just smothered my mother in kisses. My dog smothered me in wet, massively slimy saliva. We had a really wonderful reunion, and then the thunder started about 15 minutes later, and
yeah.
all of North Georgia. We both just got alerts on our phones that said, do not go out unless you've been ordered to evacuate your area.
Hmm.
I have never seen that come through before.
Wow.
And right now it's a gentle, serene rain.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going to stay that way tonight. I've never seen it just blew up all over the whole top third of Georgia, which is a massively huge area.
Hmm.
So there's that. Plus, Peanut won't eat. She's on hunger strike because I mean she's lost weight and she looks good, but she's not eating because I've been away. And now she's not eating because there's a storm. So there's that mother nurture instinct that's kicking in. Okay, that said, class is in session, and let me tell you what I learned this week.
Hmm.
And then we didn't even get a chance to talk today. So wherever you want to go, just let me blurt all of this out at once, and
Please.
then I'll be exhausted, and you can take over. Okay, so this is what I learned this week. This was the week where I've seen The Conjuring 3 times in 1 week, once at a theater in Kansas City, Missouri. And then our flight got canceled. We had to stay an extra day. My mother went into complete meltdown because I wasn't home yet. That's a whole nother story I'll save for a private phone call, but she was like really upset. And but I calmed her down. We got home. Greta was traveling with me. God bless Greta the Great. I couldn't have done it without her. Kim, Erin's friend, helped us enormously. I mean, there was the circling of the wagons. It was crazy busy for 3 days.
Hmm.
And I had a wonderful time. And I met a man who you will all see me with in the future. I'm sure that we'll be working together. He does what I do in terms of, our calling. He does a little different than I do, differently. Um, but his name is Rupert, and he's from England, and he's amazing. Uh, and there's no question that we'll be working together. And when I just knew the instant that I laid eyes on him, he was the reason that I was supposed to be in Kansas City that weekend, along with all the other wonderful people. And in an hour, when we do a World Awakening, I'm going to have the girls, the energy healers that worked on me while I was out there and got me through that event. You can tell my energy is very high, and I've been healed this week. That's part of my lesson, and we'll get back to that. But it was, and I realized and I learned why I do what I do,
Hmm.
because I was home for something ridiculous like 22 hours before I had to leave to go back to the airport again, and went to the farm for the 19th and the 20th. I was in Harrisville, Rhode Island, at what they call the Conjuring House, which is the Richardson Arnold homestead that I grew up in. And watched the film again twice there. Met I don't know how many people. came and went over the course of that weekend. And I met the most extraordinary young woman who I feel has great gifts to offer. And she was one of the last people I worked the whole line. I make Jacqueline crazy. I worked the whole line. I just touched and greeted and hugged everybody that came each night. And we did pictures and we had, it had a very intimate feel about it. But I approached her last, Jeff, and I really want you to focus on this because I want your input as well about her. But you know how sometimes you'll meet someone and it's like an instantaneous, you understand that
Hmm.
they're special, that they have great gifts, that they are intellectually very sound, no matter their age, that they're an old soul.
Hmm.
And I felt, and when I wrapped my arms around her, she retracted from me like a cat retracts its claws, completely closed in on herself, hung her head, would not look at me in the eyes, and just withdrew. And I kissed her on the top of the head or the forehead, right around here. Um, and I backed off and gave her her space, um, and let her come to me, which over the course of the evening gradually happened through one brief encounter after another, and when we finally got a photograph together at the end of the night, it was she was radiant, smiling from ear to ear, had just a wonderful experience, and blossomed before my eyes. And how many times in life do you get to have that kind of an impact on another person? How
Hmm.
many times in life do you get to connect with somebody on such a profound soul level
Yeah.
that you feel them? You don't just see them, meet them, hug them, or shake their hand. You feel them inside of you. And that is what she brings to the world.
Mm.
And she's been really struggling. And I want everyone who's listening to this to please hold Jasmine in your heart and your mind and lift her up. Let
Mm.
all of us lift her up. I told her, I told her, I said, honey, I've been through it. I have been through it, so I know of what I speak. My life has not been, it's been fascinating. It's been interesting. It's been extremely informative, but it hasn't always been easy.
Hmm.
And in fact, is usually not. So we had that in common.
Mm.
And she's one of these people that is going to be of great value to humanity. And
Hmm.
that's a very powerful statement.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to take a moment for everyone that's listening to this. And I hope that Jasmine is listening to this, to just know you are surrounded in a circle of light and love with what I think of as my tribe vibe, or for lack of a better phrase, my posse, my crowd, my birds of a feather, you and so many others. And this is our opportunity to
Mm.
let her know just how incredibly special and gifted and magical and mystical she is. She doesn't have an aura, she has a corona. Okay. So naturally, I was like, boom, I go right to the kid.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, she's probably maybe 14, 15, 16, and through there.
Mm.
But just now coming into her own in terms of understanding the existence of her own consciousness, and coming into the age of reason, coming into her own enlightenment. And sometimes, and I know you'll agree with me on this, sometimes enlightenment has a very dark side.
Hmm.
So, and that's okay because
Hmm.
that has something to teach us too. So anyway, that said, I wanted to introduce Jasmine into our Soul School family, our a world awakening family. And we've talked about this, Jeff, about how adversity and struggles and feeling withdrawn and withholding from those that we share this humanity thing with is can be very isolating and very dark space.
Yes.
But it can likewise be incredibly illuminating.
Yeah.
Okay, so go
Yeah.
on, and then go speak about this, but then whatever else you wanted to talk
Yeah.
about tonight.
Absolutely. Well, I say welcome, Jasmine, as well. If you're watching tonight or listening at some point in the future, welcome to Soul School. Welcome to the family. And there is something. Any truly spiritual person, I really do believe that it's our responsibility, it's our mission, it's our calling. It's going to be different. It's going to refract differently depending on the crystal of the person that light is shining through. But the calling really is to uncover in others what's already there. It isn't to make them mini us's and our disciples and to impress our image upon them. It is to, even just through brief encounters like that, unlock something in them that may otherwise have stayed locked up because no one acknowledged it. And sometimes it is literally a simple, a simple a simple acknowledgement that's not even explicit. You know what I mean? A hug that's given in a certain frequency, a word of, hey, there's something about you, that's just said in a certain tone and with a certain authority that has the power to stick with people for decades, that can say, in that moment, someone saw me. Someone saw something about me that I suspected may be true, but I had not yet seen myself in that moment of affirmation and acknowledgement. And any truly spiritual person, a spiritual teacher, or just a spiritual individual, that's the goal. That's the mission. That's what we do. We're called to unlock. We're not called to convince people that there's something out here that they need that they don't already have. I truly believe our purpose is to unlock what is already present within people. And sometimes that unlocking can occur through the simplest of gestures and through some chance meeting. I know there have been people in my life who have they probably don't even remember the words. They probably don't even remember the encounter, but they said something to me about the way I articulated myself in this moment, or about the way that something, whatever. And it just stuck with me. And it unlocked my potential. And it was just something that maybe shot out of the left side of their mouth without them even thinking about it. They weren't even trying to, right? And so the fact that that can happen without you even trying to speaks to the fact of how powerful of individuals we can be if we're actually intentional about doing that. So that's absolutely amazing. And I look forward to maybe getting to know Jasmine in the chat or whatever, meeting her one day myself. Yep, that's amazing. I also am going to just go ahead and put this out there into the universe, into the ears of God, that one of these days I'm going to be at the farmhouse at the same time that you're there. I've never been there, but I just believe that's going to happen somehow, some way, and I anticipate it. Also, if I can just be weird for a second, I don't know if this is not, like I've not already been doing that, but I don't know if this is for someone who's listening live, who's maybe in the chat, or maybe somebody who's listening at another time, but I see kidney stones, very painful kidney stones, and just use my words to speak to them.
You just told me.
Really?
They've got, I mean, within the last few days, a very, very painful bout of kidney stones, and I'm not placing who it is, but it'll come to me. A woman.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So for multiple people, then, just in that, whoever it's for, just in this moment, just grab a hold of what I'm saying and just believe that right now there is something happening in you. They're being dissolved and broken up, and whatever's causing these, if this is a chronic thing, we just speak to that condition to be healed and to be remedied. But I just see them dissolving. And so I just put that out there. Anyways, so there were some other thoughts I had, Andrea, and we didn't really get to talk because I know you've been busy, you've been jet setting and doing what a paranormal rock star does.
Oh yeah, you know what? Traveling sucks. It does.
It does. I don't, you know what? I used to travel, I was gone every weekend for
Mm-hmm.
years. And then after COVID, I just never picked it back up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't miss it at all. Like, there's I get the itch every now and then, and I'm like, yeah, I'd like to do it again. And then I think about the long hours in the airport and the overlays and all that. And I'm like, no, I think I'm good for now. And if it ever happens again, I'll take the opportunity. But I also really like being home for the time being.
Yeah.
So we also pray and project rest toward you as well. And that you get the deepest sleep of your life tonight and wake up fully charged.
I probably will. I
Yeah.
probably will. Yeah. With the peanut in my arms, my peanut.
Yeah.
She's hiding under the coffee table because thunder.
Yeah.
And that I get through both shows before I lose my electricity or internet. Both shows.
Mm-hmm.
You never cease to amaze me. I'm putting that out there. I sit here and I listen to you, Jeff, and I think, oh, listen to that. I mean, the wisdom that comes just emanates from you. And we've had a mutual admiration society since literally the moment that we met. But there are times that I am quite literally stunned by your brilliance and your ability to hone in on a very specific thing in a very very sensitive, creative, and still a little pragmatic way, so that it is a multi-dimensional view of the one thing that you're discussing. And I think what you just imparted to Jasmine was very important. And I will make sure she gets the link to this show, because I think it was that important. And also, you're a father. I've never had kids. I gravitate to kids, they gravitate to me. And I love them and I mentor them, and it's a wonderful life process that I've been involved with for decades, especially working at Harmony Health. It was a big, huge investment of my heart and my soul and my mind into these young, in that case, damaged boys that didn't see a way out, didn't see a way up, and didn't see a way out, and had come from abuse and neglect, or were suffering different kinds of mental issues or breakdowns. And it was an extremely challenging job. But I look back on my life and I see that everything that I have ever experienced, prepared me for Jasmine.
Yeah.
Prepared me for Rupert. Prepared me for you. And when I look at that, the experiences that I had with these two completely different people, in just the course of 1 week, that both of them would say that meeting me changed their lives. Meeting them changed my life. And it is that kind of union, that kind of simpatico, that kind of connectivity. It is cosmic. It is universal. It is love as an action word. And it raises the vibration of the whole planet. That might be that much.
Yeah.
But it raises it. It doesn't lower it. And if enough of us focus our best intentions and our deepest, most heartfelt gestures of kindness and generosity toward each other and make that habitual, we will change this world for the better.
Yeah.
And, if we don't have the hope that we can do that, if we lose all hope, It's over.
Mm.
And I refuse to give up on anyone. I refuse to walk away from anyone whose life I can improve
Yeah.
in any way that I can.
Yeah.
You are identical to me in
Mhm.
that respect. So what you said to her, it was very meaningful. It will be certainly to her, but it is to me as well.
Mm. Mm. Well, as you said, we have the Mutual Admiration Society. So everything you just said is absolutely mutual to you. Um, I had a couple thoughts come to me, and I think it will connect to some of the other thoughts that I said I had earlier, and it even maybe connects with what we're talking about right now. And I haven't had the time to really like make the connections in my head, so I'm just going to blurt them out and
Okay.
believe they're going to connect somehow because that just tends to happen. But I'm thinking of a story from the Bible in particular. There's a story where there's a woman who had a in the story, the biblical language is that she's had an issue of blood. She'd been hemorrhaging for 12 years. And Jesus encounters this woman when he's on his way to pray for the sick daughter of a man named Jairus, whose daughter was 12 years old. And so, on his way to heal this young woman, this older woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years comes up behind him and grabs the hem of his garment. And it says, when she touches the hem of his garment, virtue or dunamis in Greek goes out from him and into her and heals her. And then he gets to the home of this young girl and she's already died. And he says, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. And he says, little girl, get up. And she wakes up. But the beautiful thing about this story is it's originally from the Gospel of Mark. And there's these things in Mark that scholars call Markan sandwiches, which is just that there's two correlating events and then there's an event in the middle that connects them. And so obviously here the events that connect are an older woman who had been bleeding for 12 years and a younger woman who was 12 years old, both of whom were in the process of dying. And on his way to heal one, he encounters another. Right? On his way to heal one, he encounters the other and she's healed as a result. And I've always believed that it is in focusing effort and attention on the healing of the next generation that the older generation finds their healing, right? It's where it happens.
Right.
It is where it happens. And in the impartation we give, that you give to Jasmine, there's something that returns to you as a direct result of that. So I don't know, that just came to me in the moment. And so I thought I would say it. But it reminds me too of my own calling. I was really frustrated several years ago. Because as many of you know, and as you know for sure, I was a pastor for years. I was a pastor for a decade and some change, right around 12 years. And I was involved in ministry prior to that as well, doing missions work and all kinds of stuff like that. And I still am to a certain degree, just it's much different from what it used to be. But whilst pastoring, I had a crisis of faith due to a lot of different things that I won't go into here. And I really kind of lost my faith for a season while being a pastor. And it was a very difficult season of my life. For all suits and purposes, I became an atheist. Again, still while pastoring, it was difficult. This was my career. I didn't know what to do. I had a family. I had children. My children now are 19, 17, and 13. At the time, they were obviously much younger, and a wife and a mortgage and everything else. So I didn't know how to deal with that. And so I had to deal with it. But long story short, I did lose my faith for that season. And then later on, it returned to me. And now I call it something like faith. But something like faith returned to me. And maybe I'll get into that more in a minute. But I was very frustrated, very, very frustrated several years ago now. Not too many, but several. Just with what my calling is now, because I don't fit into the traditional church scene anymore. I still have some traditional pastor friends who will have me in to speak who like what I do, and they're more on the progressive edge of things, even if their congregations quite aren't. And so they bring me in whenever they want things shaken up a little bit, I guess. And I'll be I'll be that for you if you need me to be. But I was just frustrated, like, what do I do? Because my calling used to be, winning souls and getting people saved, and in the language we used to use, that was what I used to do. And that's a pretty high calling when you believe that's what you're doing.
Yeah, it is.
When you believe that's what you're doing, there really isn't anything higher you can be involved with, right? And so when you kind of lose that belief that God is some angry, ticked off dictator up in the heavens, pushing levers or pulling levers and pushing buttons and sending people down the little James Bond villain-esque trapdoor into hell. When you lose that image and you realize that it's not my calling to save people from hell because I no longer believe in hell like that, it shakes you up. Well, what is my calling? And so I was frustrated, and I was like, what? I still go out and I still preach and I teach theology and I teach philosophy and I do all that kind of stuff. But what is my calling? What is that thing that's my calling? Because it's not the same thing to just have an occupation. There's a calling. What? And I know I have it. I feel it in my guts.
Yeah.
But what is it? I can't articulate it. And no sooner did the words leave my spiritual mouth than the reply came, you are called to be a gatherer of fragments. And I didn't really understand at the time what that meant. And so I went on this quest to really understand that. And well, what is this about? What does that mean? And I was taken to a story in the Gospels. There's two accounts where Jesus feeds a multitude of people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think there's
only the loaves. Yeah.
Fishes and the loaves. And a lot of people think you only really think of it happening once because the stories are very similar. Mm-hmm. But the first time he provides for a crowd of thousands, mm-hmm. it's for an exclusively Jewish crowd, right? And the text makes that very clear. And after he has provided for them miraculously with a handful of loaves and fishes, he sends his disciples out to gather the remaining fragments. And they go out and they gather the fragments that are left, and there's 12 baskets full left over. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, for this being a specifically all Jewish crowd, the significance is that there are 12 Israelite tribes. And so the symbolism there is that these tribes, and these tribes that have been scattered, I mean, quite literally split into two kingdoms at that point, but these tribes that have been scattered, Jesus is saying, I've come to gather you back together as one people. Well, several chapters later, Jesus is going through an exclusively quote unquote Gentile area, which means a non-Jewish area, which was a big deal. And he encounters a woman whom Mark calls a Syrophoenician woman, but Matthew calls her a Canaanite. Now, if you know anything about the Old Testament, the Canaanites were the ancient enemies of Israel.
Right.
Now, Canaanites proper did not exist in the time of Jesus, but Matthew specifically calls her a Canaanite rather than a Syrophoenician woman because he's trying to make a very specific point, right? That this is somebody who symbolizes Israel's ancient enemies, the direct, the opposite of the individuals Jesus just provided for miraculously. And she says, my daughter is grievously vexed. Will you please heal her? And Jesus sort of ignores her and walks away several times. And I think he's reflecting the attitudes of his disciples back to them to teach them a lesson. And finally, he says to her, is it right to take the children's bread, children here he's speaking of, his fellow Israelites, and give it to their dogs? And that's just such a terrible sounding thing. But then the woman says, yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus says, your faith is incredible and your daughter is made well. Now, a lot of people, we cut the Bible up into stories, and so we don't realize that they're building on each other. Right after this event, he heals another multitude of people. And it says when he healed them, they praised the God of Israel, specifically because these weren't Israelites.
Right.
These were non-Jewish people. Now, this crowd gets hungry. They don't have food. And again, there just happens to be a kid with a sack lunch with a handful of fishes and loaves. And Jesus takes these fishes and loaves and he distributes them to the thousands present. And after everyone's eaten, he sends the disciples out into the crowd to gather the fragments. And when they bring back the fragments, it is not 12 baskets this time, but 7 baskets full of broken fragments or pieces. What's the significance of that? Well, if you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, Moses, supposedly speaking for God, commissions the children of Israel to go out and destroy 7 Canaanite nations. 7 nations specifically, they were called to go in and destroy. And if we're to believe the narrative, they did. And supposedly at the behest of God, right? So what's the symbolism here? Jesus is saying, one, hey, to you 12 tribes who are scattered, I've come to gather you together as one family. And then that gives you a sense of superiority. Yeah, we're the ones he's come to call and gather to himself. Well, then he encounters a Canaanite woman, right? And he does what? He gives her the children's bread. That's specifically the wording that he uses. And right after this event, he literally gives a crowd of individuals who were thought to be unclean and enemies of Israel the literal bread he just gave to a crowd of Jewish individuals. And at the end, 7 fragments are brought to him, representing the 7 nations Israel was called to destroy, saying to them, you're the same thing, right? You aren't 2 different things in the eyes of God. You're both equally embraced in family. And so my point being here is that the disciples went out to gather fragments and bring these fragmented nations symbolically back into wholeness and back into oneness. These things that had been scattered and shattered and spread abroad, they were called to gather together into wholeness. And I realized that was what I was called to do. I was called to the individual. We have that 12 tribes part of us that's more the spiritual light side in the way that we think of it. And then we have that side of us that is more what we think of as being at enmity with God, which is represented by the 7 baskets full. We have those 2 kind of aspects of us that we think are, one's good, one's bad. And these were shattered and scattered and spread all over the place. But a healthy spiritual individual, right, has to have all those fragments brought together. And they have to realize that you are a single entity, right? You are one whole thing. And this whole thing that you are is loved and is embraced and is beautiful. It doesn't mean everything about it can stay the way it is, right? There's some things that need to change, of course. Telling someone you're accepted and beloved exactly as you are doesn't mean it's the wisest thing to stay exactly as you are, right? It's a starting point.
It's a good starting point, yeah.
It's meant to give you a solid ground to stand on, so where you can say, okay, I don't have to do anything to go where I'm going. I'm accepted exactly as I am. So anyways, I realized that was my calling, to help individuals who are fragmented in themselves to come together into wholeness, and then corporately to help us do the same thing. And part of that for me, one of the things that happened to me was that, and this is the serendipity of you and I being connected, is because I grew up insanely fascinated with all things paranormal. I had encounters, with all sorts of things as a young man, of a spiritual nature, of a potentially extraterrestrial nature. I don't know, right? These aren't experiences that I have pinned down on a corkboard like dead moths. I don't. They're slightly ephemeral to me still. I don't know exactly what happened, but I know they happened, right? And but when I became a radical Christian, all of those things had to go, right? I couldn't be a part. Those things couldn't be a part of my life anymore because I was told anything like that is evil, right? And so you can only focus your spiritual desire in this one direction. Well, I remember when I was really recovering from that loss of faith experience. Like I was coming back around. I was feeling like myself again in some ways. And I watched The Conjuring right when it came out. Now, and I know the events aren't identical to what happened now, and I know the story as presented in the movie is not the story as it exactly happened. I know that now, but still, in watching that movie, there was something, in Psalms 42, the psalmist talks about deep calling unto deep, right? Something deep here calling to something deep here, and there being this resonance. And I don't know what it was about that movie, but there was that, I had that sense of this deep resonance, some deep calling to deep. And it goes back to the fact that I grew up in what was, for all suits and purposes, a haunted house as a kid. And it was like I had the burning hand of spirit impress itself upon my young chest, and it stayed there all my life. And once you're touched by that, you're never untouched by that.
You're never untouched.
It never goes away. And it's almost like a trap device then that just causes this stuff to be attracted to you everywhere you go in life. And and I was always so fascinated by it. But that there was something about watching that movie allowed me to reconnect with my own history, which is pockmarked by the paranormal, and allowed me to, even in that moment, begin to make sense of my faith again, because I was not 100% sold on the whole God the Father, a literal Jesus sitting next to him, and the Holy Spirit down here dancing around and doing whatever he's doing. Like I wasn't like fully sold back on like theistic Christianity. because everything about my worldview had been completely deconstructed and demolished. But in watching that movie, there was a deep calling into deep thing happening to where I remembered the experiences of my childhood, which revived a faith that I thought had died, but that had simply gone to sleep and was now being awakened, and it was
It
being
was
awakened.
it was dormant because
Yeah,
that's the only thing that it could do.
exactly. Yep. And it was, but how oddly interesting it is that it was that particular movie. You and I had no connection. We had
At
no,
all. Did
we
not
had
know
zero
each other.
connection up until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was 10 years ago when the film came out, and
Yeah.
I, uh, and we never even really much talked about it.
No.
We talked all around it. We talked about, such immediately we're both philosophers.
Hmm.
We're metaphysical philosophers. That's what we
Hmm.
are, both of us. Um, I feel very much like what you're saying about helping to gather the fragments to make the whole, to bring, the entire realization of our oneness
Hmm.
together
Yes.
wherever possible.
Yeah.
Um, in a way, that's my mission too. I
Yeah.
mean, look at the banner that I have at the top of the Buttercup Brigade. Um, I did not come to teach you. I came to love you.
Mm.
Love will teach you.
Yeah.
And I think that's so perfect, um, infused into the context of soul school,
Hmm.
because you and I might lead this little class, once a week, for our viewers and our, for lack of a better word, students. But we are also keenly aware that we too are the students and they are often the teachers.
Always. Yes.
And
Mm.
it is that exchange of mental, spiritual, psychological energy that we share. It is communion. It is
Yes.
the real meaning of the word communion,
Hmm.
what we do here. And
Hmm.
I don't even think of this as being some kind of, this is not a religious show.
Hmm.
This is school. And what have you learned from your faith, your religion, the dark times where you had to look up to see bottom and dig your way up out of a well with a depth that was immeasurable?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I have been there as well.
Yeah.
And so, because I know that, and because I know that I'm strong enough to find my way out of the darkness and into the light
Yes.
over and over and over again in my life.
Hmm.
When I see darkness in another, I do not shun it. I embrace it,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively, embrace it.
Hmm.
And I very often say to those that I am holding, whose third eye I may have opened, um, give me your pain.
Mm.
Give it to me as if you're giving me a gift.
Mm.
You don't need it. It's only a burden for you. It has no relevance in your life. Give it to me.
Yeah.
I won't hold on to it. It will not become a burden for me. It will just dissipate into the ether in a very esoteric way,
Hmm.
that harms no one, but it just transforms. It just changes forms. It goes off into
Hmm.
into the universe.
Yeah.
And it's very many people who are psychics or mediums or who have these kinds of deep spiritual gifts don't know yet how to shed it, when they reach out to another and they feel and they pull the pain, the grief, the loss, the depression, the darkness
Yeah.
from another soul. They
Hmm.
don't know how to let it go,
Hmm.
and ultimately it will weigh them down and weigh them down. And many who do this kind of work ultimately walk away from it because it's too oppressive.
Yeah.
It's too burdensome in a big picture way. Um, so one of the things that I
Mm.
think that we should teach, because so many
Mm.
of our viewers are empaths,
Yeah.
so many of our viewers are sensitives. You know, I mean, we've created this whole new vernacular to describe people who feel themselves and others very deeply in such a significant way that it profoundly changes your life.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the lessons that everyone who works in this field as an energy healer, or and not just people that do this for a living or a career, but just being a good human being and
Hmm.
extending yourself to another when you see a crisis, you see an issue, you see a problem.
Yeah.
um, but how do you let go
Mm.
of what you draw forth that releases the person who you've reached out to?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and when you said that, I felt that so intensely. Like I felt
Yeah,
like
I
a
know
shot.
you reached up like like it's something was you were getting a download or something.
Yeah. No, I felt like a shock go through me because it very much maps onto the thoughts that I'd been having all day. Like literally, just my notes for today are all just about letting go, all
Mm,
of them.
yeah.
Um, and I think that's okay. So here's the image that I've had all week, and it's certainly not a thought I've never had before. But novelty appears in the form of a repetition sometimes. Um, okay, so resonance. What is resonance? Resonance is resounding. So resonance, when you say, if you're a singer and you're singing in an amphitheater or you're singing in a chapel with killer acoustics, right?
Yeah.
What happens is you're letting go of a sound, you're emitting a sound, and in that emission you're letting go, right?
Mhm.
But because of the material the structure is composed of and the way that it's designed, what you let go of hits that surface and it returns to
And
you
then
in the
bounces
form of
back.
resonance, and resonance is
Mhm.
it resounds it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's literally resounding, coming back to you. The sound is returning. You're releasing a sound and then the sound is resounding back to you. And that's why when you sing in an environment like that, or you listen to someone sing in an environment like that, there's such a richness and a fullness, a completion and a oneness to their voice. Whereas if you sing in a soundproof room, you let go of something that just hits the wall dead and doesn't come back to you. And so there is no resonance, there is no resound. And so it sounds dead. And you can add it on later via effects, but you're just imitating the natural resonance that you get if you're singing, let's say, in an amphitheater. I guess that's not natural, whatever, depending on one's interpretation of the word natural. Anyways, but you release and then there's a resound, release, resound, release resonance. And so even when it comes to something like I was talking about the loss of my faith as a pastor, I had to let go. I had to release.
Yeah.
And I released. And in the moment you release it, it doesn't happen as quickly as the speed of sound when you're dealing with your actual life, right? So it's not like the immediate reward of you make a sound and then it returns to you when you're talking about decisions you make in life. So there might be a longer gap between the release and the resonance in real life. But the resonance does come. It does come. And I think it does have a lot to do with what you surround yourself with, for sure. If you put yourself in the kind of environment that forbids resonance philosophically or spiritually speaking, then it might not come to you as quickly as it might otherwise, or if it does, you'll miss it. But I released and then something returned to me, right? And then I was like, oh, okay. And so then I released more, and then more resounded. And then eventually I got to a point where I was living in a constant state of releasing and then having the resonance return. It was this constant state of release and return, release and return. And when you can sustain that, that's fullness, that's wholeness as a being, right? That's the gathering of the fragments of your life. The things that you thought you had to let go of are now returning to you. And then you learn to live in a state of letting go. And then what you're letting go of is constantly returning to you. And that is what it is to be a whole person. Karl Rahner, the Catholic theologian, said, in the days to come, one will either be a mystic or will be nothing at all. What does the word mystic mean? It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. G.K. Chesterton defined it as being able to look at a contradiction and know that the contradiction really does properly contradict your presently held belief, and yet hold to your belief and to the contradiction at the same time. Mm-hmm. To be able to hold to, I think he says they have one foot planted in the real world and one foot planted in fairyland at the same time. And they live in both of those spaces without feeling any contradiction between the two. They're in that space of constantly letting go and receiving, right? Releasing and receiving back. And there they find wholeness. And that's what it is to be a mystic. That's what it is to be a spiritual individual. You know, like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. And so I let go of it. And then it returns to me in some kind of crazy form. And I learned to live in that space, and I learned to live in that state. And it's a principle that's true just all over the goddamn place. Pardon my French, my English. Sorry, French. I'm always insulting the French. Yeah.
I know my swear words.
I know. I'm always insulting the French when I apologize for my sailor speak. Okay. I know. But this applies in all areas of life. I mean, there maybe even a relationship that you let go of, right? And you detach yourself from a person, and for a season you feel like a purging and a cleansing, and maybe they feel a purging and a cleansing, and then all of a sudden you're drawn back to that person. But when you come back together with that person, it's totally different from what it was before because of the letting go, right? The resonance feels so different because of the release. And we're talking about working in any kind of spiritual healing. This is the principle as well, that when you say to somebody, give me your pain, you know, no matter what's transpiring, and I think this is what people need to understand, you don't have to understand what transpires in a moment like that. This can be a deeply spiritual transfer, or it could be purely psychological, but it makes no difference, right? When somebody transfers their pain that they're feeling, when there's somebody who says to them, look, I am a neutral party, and I'm just here because I love you. Give me what's hurting you. And they feel, and then you tell them, you're not going to hurt me by giving it to me because I'm not going to hold on to it, right? Then they feel safe, and they don't, because a lot of people hold on to their pain because they don't want to give their pain to somebody else because they know their pain is going to pain somebody else. Yeah. But sometimes the role of the healer is to be the one who can take it without taking it, right? Right. They don't receive it and then become embittered by it and then transmute it into something else. No. It hits them, they let it go. They transmute it.
A sacred surrender.
Yes.
Is what it is.
And some people need people to forgive for them, which doesn't sound...
I know, but it's not counterintuitive, though. It's not.
And I think that's actually the power, whether we even believe in the process or not. That is the power of something like confession, even in, like, you know, Roman Catholicism. Mm-hmm. Whether you believe in the process or not, it is what gives it a power. Because the person on the other end, whether anything's happening there spiritually or not, is, again, beside the point. When a person feels like they can unload on a neutral party who can then just say a few Hail Marys, rub a few beads, you're good to go, kid. You know, there's a release that happens. You know what I mean? And how much more true when you're dealing with somebody who is truly standing in that place. And so that is, I think that's that all of life is that release and the resonance, the release and the resonance. And so when you hold on to what somebody gives you in a spiritual healing environment or something like that, you will transmute that into something toxic if you hold on to it.
Yeah, if you do. Yeah.
You will. Even if it's just bitterness and anger towards the individuals that you know hurt this person or whatever, it'll turn into something toxic. But when you learn that release, which is, this does me no good to hold on to this. It's not my pain. It does neither myself nor the other person any good for me to hold on to it. They've released it. They've been empowered to move on. Me holding on to it doesn't keep them free. Right. It just makes me now the servant to this pain that should have been released. And you can forgive and let it go. And then when you let that go, right, that's when the resonance happens and something sweet and beautiful returns to you. That's what all of life is. All of life is the process of exhaling, inhaling, releasing, resounding, releasing, resounding. That's the process and the rhythm of life.
And it seems to me the more that we practice that presence of the divine creation that each and every one of us is,
Mm-hmm.
and the more comfortable we become with that give and take and give and take, and understand the essence and the origin of it
Yes.
as something that's really truly deeply
Yeah.
within us. I think once we capture that that blended interactive process,
Mm-hmm.
and we become practice makes perfect. Just keep going there in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Be mindful. Your intention matters. On and on. I mean, when you stay mindful and you stay in a state of uh, interaction,
Yes.
then that process, as it speeds up, is what stirs the air
Yeah.
and raises the vibration
Absolutely.
and enhances the frequency
Mm.
that gets higher and higher and higher. And that is the methodology
Mm-hmm.
of spiritual ascension, of
Yes.
our own consciousness.
Yeah. And you're living on the you're how do I say this? When you live in that state of releasing and resonance, you're living in a kind of middle point, right? Where things are going and coming and going and coming and going and coming. And so you live in the place where you're experiencing the harmony, the harmonizing of what you must let go of and what you must receive. And so these things seem like seeming opposites, but you're living in that place of the coincidentium oppositorum, or the coincidence of opposites, which gives birth to something new. The thesis, antithesis, synthesis in the Hegelian dialectic, right? That these two things that don't belong come together and something new comes forth as a result. And when we learn to live in that place that seems like a place of tension, we eventually realize it's a place of harmony. And then what comes forth from it is the most beautiful music you've ever heard. And yeah, anyways.
And there it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can't believe it again, but boom, just like that, this hour went by.
Are you serious? I wasn't even watching the clock. Holy smokes.
All I can say is thank you all for lessons learned. That's why we're here in Soul School. And so I love you all. Watch for us again next week. And with that, class dismissed.
Peace.
Okay, we're good.
Yes.
Running off to my next show. That
All
was
right.
wonderful. You are brilliant and beautiful. I love you with all my heart.
Same. I enjoyed it thoroughly and I needed it. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. I love you, bud.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Yes. Good night, honey.
Good night.